question on Reddit recently made me aware that many of the people recovering paperbacks to make hardcover cased books are trying to cut end papers exactly to the size of the text block before applying them. This approach is open to measurement error. This video shows a method used by book restorers that ensures a perfect fitting tipped-on end paper every time. And while I'm at it, I'll explain what tipping on means. I love paperbacks, and generally I have no desire to convert them to hardcovers. The resulting book is structurally inferior to the original paperback, but there is a very large trend to make these conversions, and I understand the desire to show your love of a book by personalising it. Sometimes paperbacks do fall to pieces, and a hardcover is the most appropriate way to restore it. Either way, to do this demonstration, the first thing I need to do is remove the cover of a paperback. The cover is glued slightly onto the front and rear pages, and I pull it back in a way that I hope delaminates the cover material rather than skinning the outer pages. This book looks to be glued with per adhesive, which is indestructible. The paper will fail before the adhesive. I clean it up a bit so it's ready to receive the tipped-on folio end papers. Before I cut the paper for the end papers, I need to know what size to cut it to. I measure the size of the book, doubling the width, and then add 10mm or 3/8 of an inch to each dimension. I round up one of the measurements, well, just because. Even if you're new to this, you probably already know that it's important to have the paper grain running head to tail or vertically. Paper grain is a property of machine-made paper, card and board. Again, this is a big enough topic for a standalone video, and you can watch mine or someone else's video on the subject. The standard non-destructive test for grain direction is the simple bend test. Paper, card and board bend easier in the grain direction. I'm using a fairly heavy paper and the grain is easy to determine. People new to bookbinding may not be aware of the vast possibilities in end paper design for books. If this is you, I have a video called Introduction to End Papers. But for this book, the text is already bound, we're just recovering it in a case. This limits the options for end papers. We're going to use just about the simplest possible end paper design, tipped on folios of paper. A folio is simply a folded piece of paper, and tipping is to adhere something with a narrow line of glue. You don't need to use bookbinding jargon if you don't want to. It becomes useful if you're doing more sophisticated bookbinding and you're communicating with other bookbinders on technical detail. Tipping on is to adhere something with a thin line of adhesive. I'll use one of the folios to mask the other and then a piece of waste to mask the top folio. I fold the top waste to give a straight edge, and the fold will wrinkle less from the moisture in the adhesive. I brush away from the folds to avoid pushing adhesive under the masks. I brush over once to size the paper, and then at least one more time to get an even but not excessive layer of adhesive on the paper. This approach gives me better control on the width of the tip line and the thickness of the adhesive. Then I pitch the folds of the folios to the spine of the book. I want the folds to line up perfectly with the spine. Putting your head directly over the spine is the best way of checking this. Then I let the glue dry under some weight. A brick is perfect. Heavy paper for end papers is great for beginner bookbinders as it makes casing in easier. I have seen people overdoing this and using paper I'd describe as a light card. There is a downside to using heavier material for end papers, and it will affect how the book opens. In most hand bookbinding, where you bind the text block by sewing it, you want to use a paper for your end papers that's close to the weight of your text paper. By the time you're binding to this level, casing in will no longer bother you, and the safety net of an overly heavy end paper won't be needed. Now, the simple magic is to trim the end papers to match the edges of the book. A good solid ruler and a very sharp 9mm snap-off blade craft knife is perfect. Take your time to line up the ruler to the edges of the pages. I can tilt the knife ever so slightly to ensure I don't cut the edges of the book pages. or you can lift up the pages once the ruler is in place. The ends are slightly trickier. You can't insert the ruler between the end papers and the outer pages because of the width of the tip line, but the single outer page does give you a perfect way to align the ruler. Unless you're ambidextrous, 2 edges will be cut from the spine to the foredge and the other 2 the other way. If you have any questions, check out the video description as I've put a lot of extra information in there, but you can let me know you found the information you're after in a comment, which makes YouTube happy. If you're thinking you want to move past converting paperbacks to cased hardcovers, check out the Daz Bookbinding Channel Guide, link in the description. I highly recommend you look at the sew and board binding. I have videos on how to make a heap of variations of these. One last thing. Not only can you tip on, but you can tip in, which means to attach a loose leaf, maybe an image or a plate, by using a thin line of adhesive. There's some technical details about these paperback to squareback case conversions that I want to delve into, but that's for another video. I hope you found this video useful. Until next time, cheerio.